The story that shocked Italy. What was the respected doctor hiding? The peaceful Italian province was left speechless by this horrifying crime. Who could have imagined that behind the impeccable reputation of a successful doctor lay such dark secrets? To some, he was a model father. To others, a loving husband. But when the truth came to light, everyone was deeply shaken. Why did he carry out such a cruel plan? What drove him to commit the premeditated murder of his own daughter and her mother? And the most terrifying question, did he manage to escape justice? In this video, we reveal the details of a case considered one of the most cynical in the history of modern Italian justice. Warning, some parts may shock even the most seasoned viewers. We won't spoil the key moments. Stay until the end to find out how the events of that fateful night unfolded. This video reveals shocking details of the case that made the entire country talk. Learn how cold calculation and the desire to protect one's reputation led to tragedy in the quiet Italian town of Crema. The events took place in the summer of 2011 in a small town called Crema, Italy. It is a quiet and remote area where usually nothing significant happens. People lead peaceful, orderly lives, work, and raise their children. However, this story is about a case that shocked the local residents with its brutality. On the morning of July 21, 2011, Stefano Arnesi called the police station of the city. The man lived in this town and had a habit of visiting his daughter Claudia and his 2-year-old granddaughter Livia almost every morning for coffee. He spent time with them, talked about various news, played with the girl, and then went about his business. Stefano's voice sounded very agitated. He informed the carabinieri that he was unable to carry out his usual routine that morning. All morning, he had been calling Claudia as usual before his visit, but she did not answer, which seemed strange and immediately worried him. Then the father drove to her house on Via d'Agali. He rang the doorbell and knocked, but was ignored again. Mr. Arnesi then used a spare key that his daughter had given him for emergencies. As soon as he entered, he noticed a strange smell, like a gas leak. The man had to hold his breath and inspect the nearby rooms, fearing something had happened to his daughter and granddaughter. When he reached Claudia's bedroom, he found her lying on the bed. He shook her, but she did not respond. Nearby, in the crib, lay his 2-year-old granddaughter, who was also motionless and cold like her mother. The man immediately ran to the neighbors for help, but deep down he realized that his loved ones were already gone. When the medics and police arrived around 8:30 a.m., it was clear that there was nothing they could do for the victims. What shocked Stefano the most was the sight of his 2-year-old granddaughter, lying motionless, wrapped in a blanket in the crib. From the start, investigators believed this might be a case of voluntary departure from life, but there were troubling inconsistencies and contradictions. First, there was the gas smell. Experts arrived at the scene and inspected the apartment. There, they found 4 propane tanks used for camping stoves. These were small containers meant for a couple of days outdoors. One of them was placed right next to Claudia's bed at the headboard, while the other 3 were located in the corners of the room. It looked as though she had intentionally filled the room with gas to die painlessly. At the same time, it seemed unlikely that just 4 small tanks could produce enough gas concentration in an unsealed room to kill a child and her mother. The apartment showed signs of minor disorder, typical of a household with a young child. On the kitchen table, detectives found 10 packages of Xanax, each containing 10 tablets, nearly empty. Only 5 tablets remained in all the packages. Investigators noted their suspicious arrangement. The packages were neatly stacked side by side on the table, as if deliberately drawing attention. It seemed strange that someone planning their final act would be so concerned about arranging the blister packs neatly on the table. Any assumptions still needed verification. In fact, the initial investigation suggested an attempt at voluntary suicide. If Claudia had taken 95 Xanax tablets, she could have died from an overdose. However, toxicology tests showed insufficient levels of the drug in her blood. There was barely enough to lose consciousness, certainly not enough to cause death. Strikingly, the child's blood test results were similar. Judging by the bedroom, Claudia had arranged the gas tanks, taped the buttons shut with duct tape, began filling the room with gas, left her daughter in the crib, and lay down beside her. This seemed plausible, but discrepancies emerged immediately. Most importantly, Claudia's family strongly opposed the idea of voluntary suicide. She had no reason to take her own life. She had never suffered from mental illness or addiction. She had never experienced depression. Moreover, the deceased loved her daughter so much that even if she wanted to end her own life, she would never let her beloved child die under any circumstances. This certainty undermined the investigators' version. They decided to look more closely at the circumstances of the victim's life. At the time of her death, Claudia Ornesi was a 43-year-old single mother. She grew up in a loving environment with her parents and sister. She was a calm and pleasant woman, kind and full of life. Motherhood allowed her to fully realize her feminine nature. From an early age, she dreamed of a family and children. Livia was the fulfillment of her dream. Everyone described the protagonist of this story as a role model and a true example of a devoted mother. Under no circumstances would she have killed her daughter, despite the difficulties in her personal life. No matter how hard the detectives tried to find indisputable evidence of voluntary suicide, they failed. Claudia simply had no motive that could break such a strong and cheerful woman. The longer the police analyzed the crime scene, the more inconsistencies they found with the original version. For example, no garbage bag was found in the apartment. Clearly, the cardboard packaging from the Xanax blisters should have been inside. This seems strange if someone decided to take their own life. They would be least likely to think about throwing out the trash after taking 95 pills. They also noticed that the electric meter's control levers were lowered and its cover was wide open. This also seemed inappropriate in Claudia's situation. Perhaps the woman feared an explosion after filling the room with gas. However, suspicions only increased when the autopsy results came back. According to the forensic pathologist, both Claudia and her daughter died from gas poisoning after losing consciousness due to the medication. But fire safety experts denied this possibility given the level of propane saturation in the room. 4 tanks were clearly insufficient to kill 2 people. Thus, the version involving a third party began to make more sense. Considering the circumstances, investigators concluded that Claudia could not have voluntarily taken her own life, and the gas poisoning was linked to bags filled with gas placed over their heads. This was evidenced by characteristic marks from duct tape found during a thorough examination of the bodies. In this case, 1 tank per person would have been enough to kill them. But doing this by oneself would have been impossible. The more detectives analyzed the evidence and circumstances of the victims' deaths, the clearer it became that this was a murder. The theory of voluntary suicide was quickly dismissed. When the gas tanks were examined, suspicions only intensified. No fingerprints were found on the surface of the tanks. The idea that Claudia could have carefully wiped each tank before placing it on the floor seemed absurd. This could only be explained by the use of gloves, which were nowhere to be found, although they could have been thrown out with the trash. But even this made no sense. Doubts arose until the Xanax blisters were analyzed. None of them bore fingerprints either, which seemed too strange to be true. Claudia would undoubtedly have left many prints since she had to open 95 tablets. Investigators realized they were looking for a murderer, possibly multiple murderers, involved in this crime. Now they focused on the gas tanks and the drug, trying to trace the purchases using serial numbers on the packaging. Checking all this data was a labor-intensive process. Authorities combed not only the city of Crema, but the entire Lombardy region until they finally ended up in Carrigate, where a shopping center was located. Here they found Xanax and gas tanks from the same batch as those found in the ill-fated apartment. They managed to check the accounting records. It turned out that the tablets were purchased here on July 16, 2011, 4 days before the tragedy. The problem was that the person paid in cash, but used a discount card, which was anonymous, making identification impossible. Investigations continued. It was discovered that after these purchases, on July 19th, the same unknown person used this discount card to buy groceries and drinks in a neighboring city. Fortunately for the police, the seller remembered the person who came for these items and supplies. The seller gave a fairly detailed description of a quarrelsome buyer who was unhappy that discounts didn't apply to gas tanks. The probable culprit was a balding man aged 45-50, of average height, very well groomed and dressed. He also spoke well, but his name was unknown. The purchases made on July 19th were also suspicious. For instance, the man bought duct tape, which could have been used to secure the gas tank valves to release their contents. By this point, his identity was still unknown, and authorities were trying to understand who might have had a motive to kill a woman and a child. Clues led to her immediate circle. In particular, there were no signs of forced entry. She willingly let the criminal inside. After all these checks, detectives concluded that the only person who could pose a danger to this pair was actually Claudia's ex-boyfriend, Mauro Iori, the ophthalmologist and father of her daughter Livia, known in the town of Crema. He was a respected man who had built a successful career and came from a decent family. Claudia had fleeting but passionate relationships with this man. They met 3 years before the murder, in March 2008, when the heroine first visited him as a patient. The man was very polite, kind, and professional, charming. The lonely woman developed feelings for him. He was a prominent and successful man, the chief physician of the hospital. As soon as he realized Claudia was showing interest, he immediately invited her on a date. His manners and behavior literally swept her off her feet. He was courteous and gallant. On the path to marital happiness, there was only one problem. Claudia was a free woman, but Mauro had a wife and 2 children at the time. This troubled Claudia from the beginning, but the doctor insisted that his marriage had serious problems and that he would soon divorce. They fell in love and started secret meetings, but each encounter required leaving the city so his wife wouldn't suspect anything. Mauro blamed everything on the difficulties in his relationship and the complex divorce process. He convinced his lover that everything was on a very delicate stage, and it was best not to draw attention to the affair, so his wife couldn't use it against him during property division. Claudia felt increasingly constrained and didn't want to be just a mistress. Periodic conflicts arose because of this, but Mauro always managed to calm her down. He insisted they just needed to wait and everything would work out. Contrary to expectations, the situation worsened when Claudia became pregnant with her lover's child in May 2008. For the ophthalmologist, this was unexpected news. He was furious, believing he shouldn't have children outside of marriage. The intensity of the conflict escalated to the point where the couple had to separate. Claudia placed great hopes on the child, but they only hastened the breakup. Now she saw Mauro for who he really was from the start, someone who didn't intend to build a family with her, but merely sought entertainment on the side, which had spiraled out of control. From that moment, his politeness and kindness disappeared. He insisted that Claudia should have an abortion. This request shocked the expectant mother. Despite his persistence, she firmly resolved that under no circumstances would she get rid of the child. Months of persuasion followed, but the man failed to achieve his goal. Then he met with Claudia again and told her that his reputation was the most important thing for him. Therefore, neither she nor the child outside of marriage should know absolutely anyone. Mauro said he wasn't going to maintain any relationship with her or the child. However, the future mother protested. She felt betrayed and didn't want her daughter to live her whole life in the shadows, hiding her roots. Claudia decided to protect her interests and consulted a family lawyer. Her goal was to force Mauro to acknowledge that the child she carried was his. By this point, the divorce process had supposedly ended, according to the ophthalmologist's words. Nevertheless, Mauro continued living with his wife and 2 older children. Claudia also discovered that he had started a relationship with another woman even before breaking up with her. Thus, Claudia confirmed she had been a victim of deception. Mauro was preparing to marry a new lady from a similarly privileged background, an excellent match for him. At the moment Claudia became pregnant, his new girlfriend was also pregnant. Now the ophthalmologist feared that revealing information about Livia and the extramarital affair could cause serious problems in his life and career. Above all, he feared damage to his reputation and clinic, which he openly stated to his former lover. On February 3, 2009, Livia was born. After some time, Mauro softened and decided to help Claudia and the child who lived with her parents. He agreed to pay $400 a month for the child's upkeep. Additionally, he bought them an apartment and paid its mortgage. The biggest problem for the man was the requirement to visit his daughter once a week. This was the maximum Claudia could hope for. Even so, their relationship remained strained. The mother hoped that over time, Mauro would develop a bond with Livia and become a truly loving father. The last planned meeting was scheduled for that fateful day, July 20th. This couldn't have been a coincidence. The renowned ophthalmologist organized a dinner at the apartment. Claudia's mother spoke with the police and recounted the latest events in her daughter's and granddaughter's lives that she knew about. That morning, the girl wasn't feeling well, so the grandmother visited to support her. During this period, Claudia mentioned that her ex was organizing a sushi dinner for them. This was unlike his usual behavior, which immediately alarmed her mother. First, Mauro didn't like fish. Second, he never stayed with them for more than an hour and never surprised them with gifts or treats. The mother mentioned that when Mauro arrived with the sushi, he had a package of sauce that, it turned out, he had bought on July 19, 2011. Claudia's mother was convinced that Mauro was involved in what happened. It upset her most that her daughter genuinely believed he had finally decided to reach out to her and Livia. She even dressed up for this meeting and borrowed her mother's best earrings for the evening. She was found wearing them lifeless the following morning. Mauro was immediately brought in for questioning at the station. He voluntarily appeared there. He denied being present at his ex-girlfriend's apartment that evening. The main suspect even provided an alibi. According to him, on July 20th, he left his office at 6:30 p.m., picked up takeout food, ate it at home, and then went to the movies around 9 p.m., paying in cash. He claimed he didn't keep the ticket. Police went to the cinema and checked the surveillance camera footage. After the specified session, 38 viewers exited, and Mauro wasn't among them. Mobile phone data checks revealed that his phone never pinged near the cinema that evening. Instead, it remained all night at a beach house dozens of kilometers away. It was obvious that Mauro's statement was false. They then spoke with Mauro's wife. She recounted that she had called several times that evening, but Mauro stubbornly ignored her. She knew he could be at the beach house, though she wasn't sure exactly where he was. She first tried to reach him at 7:30 p.m., but even by 11 p.m., her husband hadn't responded to any of her attempts to contact him. The wife also tried calling his office and friends, but no one knew where Mauro was. Finally, she managed to reach a neighbor who lived near the beach house. The wife was sure he was there because the neighbor spotted Mauro's car. She called the police to check on his condition. When the house was opened, no one was inside, but his mobile phone had remained there all evening. Interestingly, during the search of the house, a note addressed to Mauro by Claudia was found. The neighbor entered with the carabinieri, saw this letter, and read it. This revealed the terrible secret of Mauro's illegitimate child. As a result, he simply left the beach house. The neighbor wrote a note asking him to call his wife and the police to reassure them that he was fine. This wasn't an especially effective precaution, but declaring him missing was avoided for now. Later, Mauro returned to the beach house and complied with the neighbor's request. Around 2 a.m., he called his wife, told her he was fine, and then phoned the police. Mauro continued to insist that he was at the cinema during the crime, but the police didn't believe him since the surveillance footage showed he neither entered nor exited. Investigators were convinced that during this period, he was at Claudia's house committing the double murder. In any case, his alibi was shattered by his wife's concerns. Now, having been caught in a lie, the prestigious ophthalmologist raised even more suspicion, particularly regarding his falsehoods. Then the evidence of his guilt piled up. It was proven that he had purchased all those Xanax packages at a shopping center in another city and paid in cash, probably to avoid being traced. Sellers recognized the man. A receipt from an online platform was found on the suspect's computer. Moreover, numerous search queries were found in his browser history. The main suspect had tried to learn how one could voluntarily leave life using propane or butane. He paid particular attention to one story about a Moroccan prisoner who killed himself using a gas cylinder from a camping stove. When questioned about these suspicious purchases, including the gas tanks, Mauro claimed Claudia had asked him to buy them so she could heat up baby food for Livia, but this sounded implausible. Under pressure from the mounting evidence against him, the man finally admitted that he wasn't at the cinema that evening, but had visited his lover. He allegedly stopped by, and when he left, they were both alive and well. He didn't know what happened to them afterward. He attributed all his lies to trying to cover up the extramarital affair so his wife wouldn't find out. He attempted to confuse the investigation, but now everyone knew about his affair and daughter, Livia, whom he hated. All of this was detailed in a dramatic letter found during the police inspection. Claudia described him as merciless and cruel, someone who betrayed and deceived her. Judging by the content, it was after giving birth to the girl that she experienced the depths of despair. The reason for her indignation was the cold, even cruel attitude toward the girl immediately after her birth. It seemed that Mauro considered her second-rate. Claudia learned that he had another child out of wedlock, who was desired, and he intended to marry the child's mother soon and become a full-fledged father. All this came to light 3 months after Livia's birth. The woman couldn't understand why such treatment was reserved for Livia. It now became clear that Claudia wasn't his class, so he had no intention of marrying her or having children. Soon, Mauro's mother, Paola, who occupied a central place in his life, appeared on the scene. It was obvious that Mauro was under her total control and feared her judgment. Typically, the adult man hid information about people and acquaintances from her to avoid condemnation. She decided who he should interact with, but Paola had no knowledge of this extramarital affair and its consequences. It was unlikely that the perpetrator thought Claudia could never earn his mother's approval. She needed to be hidden, but she pressured the doctor, cornering him. It was harder to say precisely, as Mauro continued to deny his guilt. This version became the main focus of the investigation, as it provided a substantial motive for the crime. However, most of the evidence was circumstantial. The murder weapon was never found. Authorities tried to locate the trash bag from Claudia's apartment, assuming it contained crucial evidence, including gloves and pill packaging, but all efforts were in vain. He probably disposed of the trash on his way home. Around 1:30 a.m., he headed to his beach house. On October 14, 2011, Mauro Iori was arrested and charged with double premeditated murder. The trial was complex and sparked much debate. The public was shocked by what had happened. Many simply couldn't believe that the respected doctor could murder his lover and unwanted child. By January 2013, the defense's requests to reduce the degree of guilt were rejected. Clearly, the crime was meticulously planned and premeditated. Mauro Iori was sentenced to life imprisonment. The defense filed appeals, but the decision was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2015. Additionally, the killer was ordered to pay $600,000 in compensation to Claudia's family. He repeatedly appeared before journalists, denying his guilt and calling the incident a disgrace, shame, and abuse of power by the authorities who framed him. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, support the video with a like. Let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.